Hi everyone, Aaron here for Zollotech. An iPhone 12 has been out for a few years at this point. Apple still sells it new in 2023, so I wanted to help you decide if it's worth it, or maybe if it's better for you to stick with what you have, or upgrade from an iPhone 12 to something newer, such as an iPhone 14, or wait for iPhone 15. Now, currently, like I said, Apple still sells it new, and it's been reduced since it's been out a couple years. It starts at $599, goes up to $749 in the US, and has three different variants still: 64, 128, and 256 gigabytes. Now, I did find it renewed in a few places online, and it wasn't that great of a deal, around $650, so at that point, you might as well buy it new. Apple does sometimes sell it refurbished on their Apple website, but it's not currently available, and usually the prices are quite high, so you're better off buying it new in that case. Now, it does come in a nice blue color, as you can see here, and then later the following year, they actually released it in a purple color. So I have that here, and these were both used by my daughter. In fact, the purple one is still used by my daughter. I took it off the charger as she's in bed. This is late at night when I'm filming this, and I wanted to show you how it's held up to her using it constantly. It's been dropped multiple times. The screen protector is actually cracked a couple times, so both of these have been dropped. However, they're still functioning just fine. So as far as the overall design, well, this is where we got the introduction of the squared off design again. We had that with the iPhone 4 series and then 5. Then Apple rounded the corners and then switched back to this design with the 12. So we have the introduction of the squared off design with this nice aluminum finish that's a matte finish, but it is glossy on the back and still picks up a ton of fingerprints. Just picking this up twice, you can see all of the fingerprints here. Of course, we've got dual cameras. We'll talk more about that in a moment. And then, of course, our display, but everything else is the same as any other iPhone. Volume buttons on the left with your silent switch, your ports on the bottom, and speaker, microphone, and lightning port. And then on the other side, we have our power sleep wake button, and then our 5G millimeter wave antenna. This does still have a SIM card tray as well, unlike the iPhone 14. So very similar design with the notch. We don't have the dynamic island on this one. Now, again, this is holding up pretty well, and the first thing is you can see here, this does have a screen protector on it. Now, it's been dropped multiple times. Let me remove this. Just take a second here and remove the screen protector. There we go, and you'll see it has zero damage on it. Now, it's got ceramic shield, it's holding up well, no issues there, but you can see in the corners where it's been dropped. So if I bring it up close here, you can see it's been dropped, even though it had a case on it its entire life. So it doesn't seem to be cracked anywhere, but it's held up pretty well. This was used by a teenager at the time, and it's held up well, even to multiple drops. Now, the other iPhone is actually holding up well also, and I'll show you this case in just a moment. But you can see it's still dirty. I didn't clean it or anything. It needs to be cleaned. But again, this one's been dropped just as many times. You have different nicks and scratches around the outside edge, and the screen protector is actually broken here. So let's go back to the home screen, get out of here. There we go. Back to the home screen and get out of there. You can see it's cracked in the corners, but the screen underneath is fine. I need to put on a new screen protector. I'm not sure why this happens, but my children seem to go through screen protectors as they drop the phones. There's cracks through them and more. So you can see that here. So they actually hold up really well. I find them to be very durable, but the cases don't hold up as well. So you'll see this is a silicone case. Depending on how you use it, this is placed just in a pocket or on a desk. It started to peel. It's peeled on the corners, and that's typically what you see depending on how it's used. It's never removed other than to clean the phone. But again, it's pretty rough at this point. Now, one thing that's really nice about the iPhone 12 is its overall feel in general. It's really nice to hold on to. It's not huge. It's not as small as a mini. Gives you a larger display and is very light. It's 5.78 ounces or 164 grams. It's actually gotten a little bit heavier thanks to the camera on the iPhone 14. So with the 14, it's slightly heavier. It's just nice to have a really light phone like this. So like I mentioned before, it's held up well durability-wise, and the display is held up well. It's a really nice Super Retina XDR display at 6.1 inches. but it only goes up to 625 nits. So if you live in a really bright area, you may need one of the newer Pro phones that goes over 1000 nits. But for the most part, in most situations, it will be fine. So if you're using it day to day, as long as you're not outside all day long and you need to use your phone, you should be able to see it without a problem. It has good viewing angles and goes up to 1200 nits in HDR. It doesn't do 2000 nits like today. And if we go into YouTube, you can see here's one of my videos I recorded, and this is actually in HDR. So if we go to our quality options here, you'll see we have up to 2160p or 4K HDR, and it's very bright. So if I tap on this, even though the video is not playing, you'll see it just doesn't look correct in this video because I'm not filming this video in HDR. But on this screen, it looks great. So it's very bright and vibrant, especially when watching HDR videos. Now, just like I mentioned in all of my other reviews, the display does use PWM to control brightness. Most OLED displays do. It just means it flickers the display faster or slower to control brightness. Depending on how fast it's actually doing that can bother some people's eyes. About 1 in 10, myself included, it can give you the feeling of nausea or eye strain or just give you headaches in general. You can see at 240 frames per second that this definitely has it, and if that bothers you, well, you may have to opt for an iPhone 11 that has a screen that has an LCD that doesn't use PWM. However, the latest phones, such as the iPhone 14 Pro Max, are at a high enough rate where it shouldn't bother your eyes. That's true of the 13 Pro, Pro Max, and even more so with the 14 Pro and Pro Max. Typically, these are much easier on your eyes. However, if those still bother you, your only option is an iPhone 11. But the 12 does have it. It's still a nice looking display, but if you suffer from issues with PWM, you may want to avoid it. And it doesn't have ProMotion like the latest phones, but it's still fairly fluid and fast. I have no issues with the speed. It has the A14 Bionic. It does only have 4 gigabytes of RAM, so if you go into Geekbench, you'll see that here. It says 3.58, but it seems to respond just fine. In fact, on the other phone that I have here, I actually left Minecraft running just to see how it would handle the memory. So you'll see RAM management. It does have to reload, but that's typical on any of these phones. But it's still nice and fast to go in, play your different games. And this is just Minecraft, but you can go in pretty quickly. It's nice and smooth, and you should have no issues playing regular games from day to day with it. Now, as far as the cameras, well, this is where it's a little bit behind on the front-facing camera in particular. It has a 12-megapixel camera, f2.2, but does 4K 60, but Dolby Vision up to 30 frames per second. So if we go into the camera, spin it around here, go to video, you can see we have HD options. Let's switch it to 4K. We have 4K 60, 4K 30, 4K 24. That's in HDR, but if we switch to 60, now we're back to regular. So if I hit record, now we're recording from the forward-facing camera of the iPhone 12. This gives you an idea of what it's like and what it sounds like since you're hearing the microphone from the iPhone 12. However, it doesn't have autofocus like the iPhone 14 does, so it's just not as good. It's not as vibrant as the others, and it does a good job, but it's definitely nowhere near what the iPhone 14 does. However, the rear cameras are a different story. Many people actually like that Apple doesn't seem to overprocess the cameras on the rear of the iPhone 12 and 12 Pro series. So they seem to look really good. You have a regular camera and then an ultra-wide, both 12 megapixels. Again, they can do 4K Dolby Vision HDR at 30 frames per second. It looks great. I've recorded videos with them, and it does a great job just in general. So if you want something that's not over processed, you may actually like the camera on this better than the latest cameras. Now, of course, many of you are wondering how the battery's holding up, and this is very different depending on which phone we're talking about. Both of these phones were used a lot, both the iPhone 12 in purple and the one in blue. Now, as far as the overall battery size, it's only 2,815 milliamp hours. Apple says it's good for 17 hours of video playback, or 3 less than the iPhone 14. Both of these phones have been heavily used. The blue version here in my right hand has 430 cycles on it, as you can see with coconut battery. The purple one has 326 cycles. If we go to the settings here, we find settings here. You'll see if we go to battery health and charging, the blue one, which actually has more cycles, has 86% battery health. The one on the left has 326 cycles and has 89% battery health. So it's working fine. They're both charged at night, every night, put on a wireless charger, either MagSafe or a Qi-compatible charger, and they seem to be holding up well. This one is still used full-time, the purple one that I showed you before. If we go back to yesterday, you'll see battery life is not great. So it's used quite a bit to play games. You'll see there was no cell coverage that time, but only 1 hour and 55 minutes of screen on time and 7 hours and 55 minutes of screen off time. If we take a look at today, it's got the same sort of battery life, an hour and a half almost, but it's still using about 50% of the battery. Typically, you can get about 5 hours of screen on time with this. It seems like day to day, my daughter that's using this is only getting about 2 to 3 hours of screen on time. I guess she could get 4 if she was using it throughout the day without charging it. So it's not great. Some of that has to do with this being on iOS 16.4.1 or just 16 in general, as batteries seem to fluctuate quite a bit lately. Also, it has that degraded battery health. So as it gets lower, it's going to last less, and eventually we'll actually have to replace the battery. It's not ready to do yet, but it should be fairly soon, maybe in a half a year or so with this one. Once you get down to about 80%, that's when you want to replace it if it tells you to do that. If it doesn't, you can continue to use it, but you just won't have 20% of your battery to use. Now, these phones are still IP68 water resistant, 6 meters for up to 30 minutes, so they should hold up fine, but this one hasn't been in water at all. Neither of them have. They've just been dropped on different surfaces. As far as future iOS support, well, since they have the A14 Bionic in them, I would expect it to have support for quite some time. Probably another 5 years or so based on the current rate, but it could be only a few, but typically Apple's been supporting them for at least 5 years, sometimes 7 years, and much longer with security updates. So maybe we'll get to iOS 20, 21, maybe even beyond that. So we should have support for this for some time. You won't get the latest features, such as things that will utilize the dynamic island, or maybe some other features they'll bring, but you should get the basic features with things such as the lock screen customization, music app changes, things like that you should see. So anything that's in the App Store you should be able to use. All of the apps you would love should be compatible for many years. So that's one of the great things about this having an A14 and being one of the more modern designs. And if you're wondering if you should buy an iPhone 12 in 2023, that really depends on the current deal. If it's full price, I would probably recommend against it because there's a lot of deals at many different carriers around the world that will give you an iPhone 14 for free, sometimes even the Pro model. So if you can get that, I would go with the latest. However, if you don't care about that or you get a tremendous deal from an iPhone 12, maybe it's a couple $100 or $300, then it would be worth it. But if it's the same price as a 14 or even a 13, I would get with whatever is new. I was surprised that Apple still actually kept the iPhone 12 for sale, but it is a less expensive option and you probably can get it pretty reasonably from a carrier. Sometimes free, sometimes buy one, get one free, depending on different carriers. There's different deals. So it could be an iPhone 12 this time, or maybe even iPhone 14s I've seen buy one, get one on. So I think a lot of the deals don't make sense to pick up an iPhone 12, but if you still have one, maybe at this point in the year, I would hold off until September, until iPhone 15 releases, see what that has to offer, and then upgrade. Or you could get an iPhone 14 then when it's actually less expensive. So that's the iPhone 12. I think it's a great phone. It's definitely been great for my kids, and I think it's a great phone as far as what it can do, its capabilities, but for the price, again, I might opt for something a little bit newer. Let me know your thoughts and experience with the iPhone 12 in the comments below. And of course, if you'd like to get your hands on this wallpaper, I'll link it in the description like I normally do. If you haven't subscribed already though, please subscribe. And if you enjoyed the video, please give it a like. As always, thanks for watching. This is Aaron. I'll see you next time.